Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Second Samuel, and the events are getting more exciting because David is about to consider moving the Ark of the Covenant to the city of David. Now, in chapter 6, verse 1, it says, David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. Now, the word again means they were there in the earlier coronation. If you recall, in chapter 5, you had all of Israel gathered together and anointed him as king. In this case, we have uh, the idea of chosen men. This is really how should we say? These are all the young men, not the elderly. All of Israel earlier on in chapter 5 were the elders. In chapter 6, these were the choice young men. These were the ones who could fight. These were the ones who are able. And there were 30,000 of them. And we read that this is the second gathering, right? The second gathering. In verse 2, it says, David then departed from Baal. This would be Baal Yehuda. Baale Yehuda. Baale Yehuda. Now, understand, if he has to depart, he has to first go there. Because where is David? David was in Hebron, right? From Hebron. So he has to go to Baale Yehuda, and it is commonly known as Kiryat Yearim. Now we read of this in 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 2. The ark of God was located in Kiryat Yearim, and it says in 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 2, for a long time, for 20 years. Now, it gives us a feel right now, if you have the context, that if David gathered all the chosen ones, and this is the second time, the first time in chapter 5, the gathering and the coronation was in Hebron. And David was made king of all Israel, not just Judah, when he was in Hebron. And they were not yet uh, conquered the stronghold of the Jebusites until after the coronation. Now, the coronation eventually took place in the later part of chapter 5. And after that, you find that the time has come for David to move the ark of God, right? So it says he went there and he left Baale Yehuda with all the people who were with him to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called. Now, this word here, I think we may need to correct this a little bit. It's not the name, it is a name, which is called by a name, right? Small letter name. It is called by a name. It has a name. The ark of God has a name. And the name is the Lord of armies, who is enthroned above the cherubim. Now, this idea here is that the name of God is Jehovah Tsevaot. This one here is Jehovah Tsevaot. And it says he is enthroned. Now, the idea of enthroned here literally means to sit. So what does that mean? Now, these are all very important concepts which we seldom deal with nowadays. Why? Is because if you understand that the Ark of the Covenant is a box, right? It's a chest. And there is a cover on top. And with the cover on top, then you have the two, how should you say, the two cherubim with the wings touching each other. And what we see is that this part here, right on top, this part here is called the throne. And so that is why the translator used the word enthroned, because it is envisioned that Jehovah Tsevaot is sitting above the cherubim, and the cherubim is part of the kafar. The kafar. The kafar is actually the cover. And so it is always called the mercy seat, right? The seat of atonement, the covering. And so the ark itself, of course, is sacred with all the sacred things inside, but it was designed in such a way that their gold throne is for God. And so during the time in the wilderness, God will appear to Moses in the form of the cloud, pillar of cloud, and is always above the Ark of the Covenant. And so this Ark of God has a name, and the name is of the Lord of armies, of Jehovah Tsevaot. And so the Ark of God is always referred to as Jehovah Tsevaot. And Jehovah Tsevaot is about God being the general of the army. And in this case, of course, the army of Israel. And so oftentimes you would find that the ark is so important to them that God had used it for battle purposes. If you recall in the book of Joshua, when they first entered, they used the Ark of the Covenant as the front stage to encircle Jericho. And so after 7 days, they represent or symbolize that God is fighting with them. And so eventually you find that in the book of First Samuel, Eli had instructed for the ark to go to fight the Philistines, but they failed because it was not a battle of God. But nevertheless, what I'm trying to allude to is that the ark of God is called the Jehovah Tsevaot because God is envisioned to be on the throne, and that in itself is the envisioning. All right. Moving to verse 3. In verse 3, they had mounted. Now, the word mounted really is, well, the word here is to cause to ride. The word mounted is very much like, mounting a horse. Cause it to mount. Cause what to mount? The ark of God, to mount it on a new cart. They also call the cart a wagon. In some cases, this word is used for a chariot. Basically, it is a cart that can be pulled, right? That can be pulled. And so in this case, you have the oxen pulling it. And so what we find is that this is where they had placed the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the cart itself, I'm not quite sure how big the cart is, but the Ark of the Covenant was seated on it, right? The Ark of the Covenant was seated on it. Something like that. Now, what is going to happen is David is moving it from the house of Avi Nadav. Now, the house of Avi Nadav was where in Kiryat Yarim they had stored it for 20 years in his house. And it was on a hill, right? On a hill. And he had two sons that he instructed, Uzzah, and the other one is Ahio, the sons of Avinadav, and they were leading the new cart. Now, what does it mean to lead the new cart? It means that they were on the cart. They were on the cart. And that's one aspect of it. Because the idea here is, as in terms of leading the new cart, it could be sitting on top of it, or they could be in front leading it. Now that's possible. So likely, right? We have two scenarios here. And based on this, we need to understand what this word leading actually means. Now, you can see from this word here, this word is nahag. And so this word here actually means to drive, to lead, right? And I guess these are two, to guide, that would be another word. And so in all purposes, these are how people envision, based on the word that we have, we can actually see how the journey is going to be, whether it's driving, which is one, leading is two, and guiding is three. And to talk about guiding, I think we are talking about just standing at the side here, right? That's number three. All of these comes from the same word, nahag. And there were two of them, Uzzah and Achio. So two of his sons were doing it. Now, I guess for a purpose of a background, we would see that Avinadav is from Judah, as far as we can tell. Now, Avinadav is a very popular name in Judah as well. So it's likely that Avinadav is from Judah. He's not from the house of Levi, right? Now, what is important is that the Jews actually commented that no matter what tribe they may be, all of them are supposed to know what has happened and how to deal with the Ark of the Covenant. And we read in the book of Numbers, let's see. In the book of Numbers, chapter 7, verse 9. And if they had read it, they would know that they would bear it on their shoulders. And we always need to understand that the Ark of the Covenant also have rings and have poles to carry it. And so it's never intended to be riding on a cart. And the purpose of it being on rings and on poles is so that nobody ever touches the Ark of God. And it was argued that Avinadav should have known better. And David as well, but David doesn't seem to know. And so when they brought it with the Ark of God from the house of Avinadav, which is on the hill, it means that it would be going downhill. And if it's going downhill, then we find that we have Ahio was walking ahead of the ark. And so now we can fill in the blanks. The first one here is Ahio. If this was Ahio, then we'd say that Uzzah would be behind him, either driving it, and this would be Uzzah, and that would be Ahio. In verse 5, it says that meanwhile, David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord. Now, understand this word, celebrating. The word celebrating is sahak, right? Sahak. This this word here comes from the play of how would you say this? This word celebrating is about laughing. And we tend to see this as a laugh, a play. They are being very joyful before the Lord. And it says, before the Lord, it would be to the face of God. And they were just laughing, prancing, and literally the English word celebrating is an all-encompassing word, but you need to think of it as individually laughing, playing, gleeful, are skipping here and there, singing with all kinds of juniper wood with lyres, harps, tambourine, castanets, and cymbals. They were making merry, I think would be a good word, right? Making merry. Because what we are seeing is after 20 years, the Ark of God is finally making its way to the city that David has built. That would be Jerusalem. Verse 6, when they came to the threshing floor of Nakon, the threshing floor of the Nakon, you find that that's a location. Now, we don't know exactly where it is, but it's on the way to Jerusalem. We find that the Ark of God was let loose. Now, that whole idea overturned it is let loose. It also means it was swaying. That's the word. It was going to fall. So basically, what we're seeing is as the ark was moving down the hill, it was rocking back and forth, right? In the rocking motion, might have caused it to tumble and was almost going to tumble off the cart. And so, with that, we find that Uzzah had reached out toward the ark of God, and it says here he took hold of it. Now, this word "took hold of it" is achatz. It is to hold it. Let me just put it down. This is to hold it, which is here. To grasp it. I think it would be a picture that it was almost going to fall or is attempting to fall off, and he just reached out to pull it back, right, so that it doesn't fall off the cart, because the oxen nearly overturned it. That's the picture we are getting from the text. And so Uzzah had, well, I guess he had not realized that no one is supposed to touch the ark. Now, how was it moved up to the cart? We probably won't know. It could have been carried onto the cart. Maybe the poles were there together with the cart, but instead of carrying it all the way to Jerusalem, it was left onto a cart that was unused. Now, we are not here to judge the situation, but we're here to observe the narrative of this event. In verse 7, we find something very, I won't say strange, but very surprising to us. And many people are taken aback because it says, the anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah. Now we understand the anger of the Lord means the nose of God was hot, right? Hot means burn. So the anger of the Lord is the nose of Jehovah. And so we have modernized the wordings, but in the Hebrew, it's a very visual thing. It's like God's nose is bright red now and it's literally burning out. And so he was really angry. So there are not many occasions when God's anger is burning so intensely. And whenever it did, disaster will strike. We have read that all over the place. Whenever God's nose is burned against an individual, that individual will be struck dead. And so we now see that the sons of Aaron, when they burn strange fire, God's anger was ignited. And so God struck him down there for his irreverence, and he died there by the ark of God. So let's break this down a little bit. The idea of strike means it means to scourge. It is a form of punishment. And so God slayed him. Now, how did God slay him? We don't know. But the words say that God slayed him, God killed him. And this is something divine. We did not see fire coming down from heaven, but we did see that the moment he touched or pulled back the ark of the covenant by his hand, the reason said here is that God struck him down for his, well, it says here irreverence, but it should be seen because of his fault or because of his error. And then it says that he died there. The word is Yamut, and literally he ended there. He ended there. And this word by, it actually means beside. It also means, well, let's see what we can say. It is beside, it is with, it is against. And so we can think of it that he actually was struck dead there on the spot. And so we can say that this was on the spot. So whether he was walking beside it or whether he was sitting driving it, he had died right there, next, I would say next to the ark. That is how the text actually goes, right? Wherever he was struck there and then. Now, what is this era that we're talking about? And this is something which we need to understand. The era uh, is because he touched it, I would say, right? Because he touched it. If they had remembered Numbers chapter 7, he remembers the book of Joshua. The ark was always carried across the Jordan. It was never put on anything. It was instructed that the Levites were to do it. And so nobody is supposed to touch. It doesn't matter who. Now, these are some of the instances that it appears that God is so serious with things which today, when we look at it, it's like it's no big deal. But in the eyes of God, it was a fault, which tells us something. When God puts it into an instruction, especially with regards to the tabernacle and what's in the tabernacle and how to do it, and they are to cleanse themselves before they can actually do it. The utensils, including the ark of God, has to be carefully maneuvered, has to be carefully taken care of, has to be very careful to handle. And the ark is not something that you can touch. And that is why it is always placed inside the Holy of Holies with a curtain that would separate it, and nobody is supposed to see it, to touch it at all. And so in this case, to move it is a very serious thing. And even in the early chapters of First Samuel, they had carried it into battle, but they lost it. And the Philistines who took it had trouble keeping it because Jehovah is displeased with the ark being placed there. And now, when it is a time of peace, and David has all the good intentions to move it to the city of David, he is confronted with the fact that somebody touched it. And so, God striking Uzzah down is a reaction by God to punish anyone who disobeyed his rule with regards to his presence, with regards to the Ark of the Covenant. And the ark is very important. This is very different from the menorah, from the table of showbread. And like the incense that they were supposed to burn, the sons of Aaron burned the wrong ones, they were struck down immediately. The ark of God is so sacred that it is God's presence that would be symbolized to be there on top of it as a throne on this place where the ark would be. And so it's sacred, like how God spoke to Moses. You're on sacred ground, take off your shoes. And you're not supposed to simply touch anything that is directly related to God. And this became a prime example. In verse 8, David became angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah, and that place has been called Peretz Uzzah to this day. Now, without the Hebrew, we find it a little bit difficult to handle. You find that David was angered, right? He became angry. He was, how would you say, he was displeased. You could say that this word angry is displeased. He was grieved because of the Lord's outburst. And the word outburst here is the breach. It's peretz, right? It's called peretz. Like the Euphrates River, it's peretz. The outburst, it's a sudden burst forth. So God's anger bursts forth and divinely struck down Uzzah. just like Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron, when they burned strange fire in the sanctuary. God sent a fire from heaven and struck them dead. And that would be an outburst. And so this outburst against Uzzah is called Peretz Uzzah, because the outburst is called Peretz. Now let's take a look at this idea. Why was David angry? Now, David wasn't angry at God. David was angry with himself, right? David was angry with himself. When God had struck Uzzah down, David was suddenly shocked and he was displeased with himself because God was angry. That's the whole picture, right? That's the whole picture. He was displeased with himself. He was angry with himself because the outburst of God right here against Uzzah shows God's displeasure, right? God's displeasure. And David was also displeased with himself because he was caught unaware. Why would God strike Uzzah down? Now, whenever God strikes somebody down, it is something extremely serious. And so David was wondering what happened. That would be his emotion, I would suppose. Let's take a look at verse 9. In verse 9, it says, so David was afraid of God, or was fearful of God that day. So notice the anger that he had was not against God, but he is angry with himself. He is angry at why he did something that God responded this way. And so he said, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? To me means to the city of David. That would be the concern of David. David is extremely fearful because now that God has struck Uzzah dead, that the journey cannot continue. So verse 10 says, David was unwilling to move the ark of the Lord into the city of David with him. And so what did he do? The idea of moving the ark of the Lord, this is to turn aside or take a direction that turns. So this is what this word move actually means. And they have to take a turn into the city of David. But David decided, right? David had decided that he would turn to the house of Oved Edom, right? Oved Edom, the Gittite. What does it mean to take it aside? Now, the word take it aside literally means to turn or to, how should we say, to turn to incline, to thrust away. And so now he had decided not to bring it to the city of David. He actually shifted it to the house of Oved Edom. That's what is the solution to the anger of God being burst out against Uzzah. And so the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed Edom the Gittite for 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed Edom and all his household. Now, we need to know a little bit about Obed Edom. Why was he blessed? And what does it mean to bless? Let's take one at a time, right? Obed Edom is thought to be a Levite, right? It's thought to be a Levite, as a gatekeeper. So he stands at the gate, and this is usually referring to First Chronicles, chapter 26, verse 4. Now, we need to know that there are a number of Obed Edom in the Bible. And in this case, it is popularly recognized that Obed Edom is this particular First Chronicles 26 Obed Edom as a Levite. And as a Levite, he says, God bless Obed Edom and all his household. And the relationship of blessing actually came in First Chronicles chapter 26, verse 5. And he had 62 grandchildren. And this is really interesting. He has 8 sons. And the 8 sons had many children as well. And so, as I mentioned to you when we were in chapter 5, that David had many wives and concubines, and then there was a list of all his sons. The children of David is a symbol of blessing. And so, in the case of Obed Edom, he had 8 sons and 62 children. And this in itself is seen in the Hebrew terms as a blessing. So children is seen as a blessing of God. We come to verse 12. Now, verse 12 tells us this. Now it was reported to King David, saying, what did he say? The Lord has blessed the house of Obed Edom and all that belongs to him on account of the ark of God. So David went and brought the ark of God up from the house of Obed Edom to the city of David with joy. Now, at this point in time, David takes the indicator that God is pleased. God is pleased. That's why God blesses. Right? That's why God blesses. And now, how, in what other ways is the blessing seen? We're not quite sure. But they are all very visual, and they could see that the house of Obed Edom all had children. Now, maybe they had all conceived. Maybe they were all conceived at the same time. They were all conceived with multiple children at the same time. Now, that is what some commentaries have suggested, because in First Chronicles it says he had so many grandchildren. Some Jewish commentators suggest that they all had multiple children. The wives of his sons all had multiple children at the same time. Now, we don't know. So I'm just sharing with you as a sense of speculative observation. But it can be seen because God actually blessed the house of Obed Edom. It has to be seen. As much as it was reported to King David, it must be seen. And everything that belongs to him, so it must be maybe more than just children, right? But we are told that he had many children. We're not told how many other physical animals he may have. And they associate this blessing to having the presence of God in their possession. That the presence of God shown by the ark of God was there in the house of Obed Edom, and God is pleased. And when God is pleased, he blesses. And when God blesses, it can be seen. I'm sure we all think of good health, joy, and peace as blessings. But in the Hebrew context, these are all blessings. And if it's seen as from God, they would be ascribed to things that can be visually accounted for. Now, we come to the end today, and we will continue from verse 13 tomorrow. All right? Okay. I'll see you all tomorrow then. We will continue chapter 6, verse 13 onwards.